In continuation of the comparison of Hitler and Stalin, we will discuss their political and ideological views, activities during the First World War, and also compare their paths to the post of head of state. The main views of the Führer were formed in his youth, during his life in Vienna from 1908 to 1913. Vienna, at the beginning of the 20th century, was the multinational European capital in which this very multinationality began to cause controversy. The Germans of Austria-Hungary were hurt by the state's loyalty to a large number of other nationalities. The main outraged was the German bourgeoisie, to which Hitler so dreamed of referring himself, over which, moreover, the threat of rapid industrialization and technological progress loomed. This provoked the emergence in bourgeois circles of various nationalist ideas that would become the basis of the worldview of Adolf Hitler. Let's briefly describe these ideas. And let's start with anti-Semitism. This term means intolerance and hostility towards Jews as an ethnic group, is a kind of xenophobia. The term appeared in Germany in the 70s of the 19th century. Hitler is known to have read many anti-Semitic magazines and newspapers. And Adolf himself wrote, "Since I began to deal with this issue and began to look closer at the Jews, I saw Vienna in a completely new light. Everywhere I went, I met Jews. Gradually, I began to hate them." Social Darwinism. This ideological movement involves the use of the theory of natural selection by Charles Darwin in social spheres, human relations, politics, and economics. Social Darwinists believe that those who are adapted to political and economic changes survive. Of course, social Darwinism was inextricably linked with racism and argued that some races, with the further development of society, will find themselves in increasingly worse position. The ideas of racism and social Darwinism among the German bourgeoisie were widely disseminated thanks to the work of Stuart Houston Chamberlain. National Socialism. Hitler's socialism has nothing in common with Marxist socialism. Socialism for Hitler is the creation of social equality, which is possible only within the framework of one race. After all, races are not equal. The National Socialist German Workers' Party was created in 1920 from the German Workers' Party with the proclamation of the 25 points, which reflected the anti-Semitic, nationalist, and anti-capitalist orientation of the party ideology. Hitler would later formulate the party's goal as the annihilation and extermination of the Marxist worldview. An important aspect of Hitler's worldview is anti-communism. Mein Kampf is riddled with hatred of Marxism and Jewry. Marxism, which is the basis of the communist system, is an invention of the Jews to carry out their insidious plans. At the same time, I once again clarified to myself more precisely the connection that exists between Marxism and Jewry. Marxist theory, with its internationalism, is contrary to the nationalistic, elitist views of Hitler. Hitler was seriously influenced by the anti-Semitic views of the mayor of Vienna and the head of the Christian Social Party, Karl Lueger, who is mentioned in Mein Kampf, as the most powerful German mayor. Along with the ideas of Luger, Hitler was fond of the ideas of Georg von Schenner, one of the leaders of the nationalist movement, a representative of pan-Germanism. Pan-Germanists advocated the unification of ethnic Germans into one state. The formation of the views of Joseph Jugashvili falls on the period of his studies at the Tiflis seminary. The rules and strict discipline of this educational institution engendered in many of his students an aversion to the existing social order. This also affected Stalin. As Joseph himself recalled, it was in the seminary that he first became acquainted with Marxism and joined the underground groups of Russian Marxists. Marxism is a philosophical, economic, and political movement based on the works of Karl Marx and his comrade Friedrich Engels. It is a type of socialism. The main ideas of this movement are the materialistic understanding of history, Marx's theory of surplus value, and the dictatorship of the proletariat as a necessary form of exercising power. Important in Marxism is the idea that capital divides society into two classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Marxist literature was banned in the Tiflis seminary, as were other authors, Feuerbach, Darwin, Spinoza. The forbidden literature was avidly studied by Stalin and the other young oppositionists. The rebellious spirit of Stalin found himself in Marxism, which became the basis of Stalin's understanding of the world around him. And all his further views were based in one way or another on the works of Marx, Engels, Lenin, Plekhanov. Joseph Jugashvili, with the beginning of his studies at the seminary, finds himself in a rather multinational environment in Tiflis. But we are not aware of any nationalist inclination of Stalin in his youth, despite the fact that he represented the national minority of the Russian Empire. In 1913, Stalin's work Marxism and the National Question was published, in which he called for rebuffing nationalism, giving preference to internationalism. Stalin's attitude to religion is not so unambiguous. On the one hand, we have a man brought up by a religious mother, who studied worthily in two spiritual institutions, and on the other hand, a statesman who unleashed a mass of repressions on the church. Probably in his childhood, Jugashvili, under the influence of his mother and the priests of the Gori school, was religious. Later, during his studies in Tiflis, his position in relation to religion began to change, which of course was influenced by the same Marxism. From the memoirs of Stalin's daughter we learn, he never had a religious feeling. Endless prayers, violent spiritual training could cause in a young man who didn't believe in the spirit, in a God for a minute, only the opposite result. Extreme skepticism towards everything heavenly, sublime. Also, Stalin's attitude to religion is well indicated by his quote from Questions of Leninism. We are conducting propaganda and will continue to conduct propaganda against religious prejudices. The legislation of the country is such that every citizen has the right to profess any religion. This is a matter of everyone's conscience. That is why we carried out the separation of church and state. The party cannot be neutral in relation to the carriers of religious prejudices, in relation to the reactionary clergy, who poison the consciousness of the working masses. It is worth mentioning that Stalin was an anti-Semite, which is interesting since anti-Semitism is contrary to Marxism. Of course, Stalin did not allow himself official statements regarding the Jews and even spoke out against anti-Semitism. But we can infer his hostility towards the Jewish people by studying the memoirs of his contemporaries. Nikita Khrushchev recalls Stalin's dislike for the Jews, citing his following words: "It is necessary to organize healthy workers, let them take clubs, and, when the working day is over, beat these Jews." Stalin's anti-Semitism is also evidenced by the memoirs of his daughter Svetlana, who accuses her father of making incorrect statements about her chosen ones of Jewish origin. During the reign of Joseph Jugashvili, anti-Jewish repressions took place in the Soviet Union. The largest of them were the case of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee. 13 out of 15 accused members of this organization were shot for high treason and Jewish bourgeois nationalism. The second major case is the case of doctors. It was a fabricated criminal case in which eminent Soviet doctors were accused of having links with the international Jewish bourgeois nationalist organization Joint, created by American intelligence. It is significant that the defendants in these two cases were rehabilitated after Stalin's death. On February 5, 1914, Hitler appeared at the draft board in Salzburg. The conclusion of the commission reads: "Unfit for military and auxiliary service, too weak, released from military service." On August 1, 1914, Germany declared war on France and Russia. Hitler was undoubtedly happy about this, being sure that the war would dot the i's. A couple of weeks later, Hitler volunteered for the 16th Reserve Infantry Regiment. Hitler rose to the rank of corporal and was appointed to a rather dangerous position as a regiment message runner, which suited him perfectly. He even refused to be promoted. In 1916, Hitler was wounded in the thigh and spent several months in the infirmary, but recovered and continued to serve. It should be noted that Hitler is described as an excellent soldier by his commanders. He possessed the most important military qualities: courage, enthusiasm, diligence, and readiness to help his comrades. Hitler's military merits are also evidenced by his awards, among which the Iron Cross of the First Degree is the highest award for a soldier of those times, which he received, among other things, for saving the life of the wounded commander of the Ninth Company, dragging him to the trenches. In October 1918, Hitler had come under a gas attack. A few hours later, he became completely blind and was sent to the infirmary. Some time later, while undergoing treatment in the infirmary, Hitler learned about the end of the war and its result. This became the most disgusting news in his life. Undoubtedly, the military past of Adolf formed in him the features of a future politician. The young man became confident and even more convinced of his ideas about the world, and the shock experienced from the lost war filled him with determination to act. The activities of Joseph Jugashvili during the First World War are strikingly different from Hitler's. Despite the fact that Russia had participated in the war from 1914 until the end of 1917, Stalin did not participate in hostilities. What was he doing? Even before the war, Stalin was actively engaged in revolutionary activities and was arrested several times. In 1903, Jugashvili, known by his other party pseudonym Koba, after the split of the RSDLP into Mensheviks and Bolsheviks, joined the Bolsheviks. Further, Koba was engaged in organizing strikes of workers, participated in party congresses, and attended other party events. In 1913, Stalin was arrested once again and sent into exile into the Turkansk region, where he spent almost the entire time of the war. In the last month of his exile, he was redirected to the city of Akinsk. Obviously, the war seemed like an excellent time for Marxists to intensify their anti-government and propaganda activities. By 1917, Russia was in a deep economic and food crisis, which was one of the reasons for the anti-government uprisings in February 1917, which turned into an armed uprising. March 2nd, Emperor Nicholas II abdicated. Power passed to the provisional government. Only after these events, Stalin, having received his freedom, returned to Petrograd, where he continued to follow the party course in order to achieve power for the Bolsheviks. And he was an employee of the editorial board of the communist newspaper Pravda. In October 1917, the leftists seized power as a result of the revolution and changed the course of world history. Among the main organizers of the revolution, most historians distinguish Lenin and Trotsky. Stalin stands out less. After the end of the October Revolution, the Soviet government decided to end the war they condemned. And on December 15, 1917, a truce was concluded on the Eastern Front. After lengthy negotiations, on March 3, 1918, a separate peace treaty was concluded in Brest-Litovsk, according to which Russia suffered huge territorial losses. We understand the different approaches of the nationalist and the Marxist in this case. The first one, following his racial nationalist ideology, believes that he has nothing but Germany. He is convinced that he must fight for the Germans to gain their rightful dominance. The second one fights with the power in his state, having no desire to fight for a system that he considers unacceptable. He and his party comrades are moving towards the political collapse of the state, despite the fact that their country is participating in the war. Several volumes could be written about how these two statesmen became heads of state, as well as about their worldview. We will dwell on some interesting moments and characteristic features of the formation of Stalin and Hitler as dictators. In 1920, Hitler retired from the army and devoted himself entirely to political activity. His oratorical talent gained momentum, and soon he became an indispensable person in the NSDAP and was elected chairman of the party. In the autumn of 1923, Germany was going through hard times. The Ruhr was given to the French. Hitler decided that it was necessary to act, and on November 8, 1923, an event took place that went down in history as a beer hall putsch. Without going into details, I will say that the putsch was suppressed, and Hitler was sent to prison in which he spent only 260 164 days out of 5 years ordered by the court. After his release from prison, Hitler resumed the activities of the Nazi Party. In the Reichstag elections of 1928, the party gained only 2.6% of the vote, but in 1930 it was already 18.3%. In 1932, Hitler lost to Paul von Hindenburg in the presidential election. However, success was close, and 2 months later, in the elections to the Reichstag, the National Socialists gained 37.3%. Due to a vote of no confidence in the government put forward by the Communists, President Hindenburg called a re-election, in which, albeit with a lower percentage of the vote compared to the previous elections, 33%, the NSDAP won. On January 30, 1933, Hitler was appointed Reich Chancellor, but this did not mean the unlimited power that Hitler needed so much. Having become Reich Chancellor, Hitler began to destroy the Marxists he hated. One of the reasons was also the burning of the Reichstag. The Communist Party was soon banned, and some Social Democrat deputies were also arrested. Hitler made full use of the methods of terror and other anti-democratic methods. He did not hesitate to use the SS and the SA units. On June 30, 1934, the apotheosis of Hitler's policy was the Night of the Long Knives, in which recent associates of the Führer, the highest ranks of the assault squads, and their head Ernst Röhm, were arrested and executed. On August 2, 1934, the president of the Weimar Republic, Hindenburg, died. Adolf Hitler immediately united in himself the highest government positions, becoming the Führer, a demigod with unlimited power. As a result of the October Revolution, power in Russia passed to the RSDLP party, in which Stalin held important position. He was a member of the Council of People's Commissars. The Civil War began. During this period, Stalin was the chairman of the Military Council of the North Caucasian Military District, and later a member of the Revolutionary Military Council of various fronts. In the course of the Civil War, Stalin personally led military operations on some fronts, and thus gained considerable experience in military leadership. The Civil War ended in 1922 with the victory of the Bolsheviks over the anti-Soviet army. On December 29, a decree was signed on the formation of the USSR. From that moment on, the most curious period of the struggle for power of Joseph Jugashvili began. By that time, Lenin had already suffered 2 strokes and felt unwell. Lenin, in the last years of his life, observed the opposition of the main persons of the party who claimed his post. He wrote a letter to the Congress, which was read after his death in 1924. The letter gave a description of his closest associates, including Stalin, whom Lenin proposed to remove from the post of General Secretary. According to the results of the vote held on this proposal, Stalin remained in his post. The main reason for the success of Stalin's political career was his ability to consistently, coolly oppose various comrades claiming power. Trotsky was considered the main charismatic leader after Lenin, which led to the creation of an unspoken triumvirate against him: Zinoviev, Kamenev, Stalin. Trotsky was defeated, and in 1925 he was deprived of the post of chairman of the Revolutionary Military Council. After that, the triumvirate broke up and two new counterweights appeared. Stalin began to work against Zinoviev and Kamenev. Gradually, he promoted his supporters through the ranks. And in the end, Stalin won the support of all regional party organizations. Kamenev and Zinoviev began to lose their top positions and even teamed up with Trotsky to oppose the Stalinist majority. At the end of 1927, at the Congress, Stalin and his supporters achieved the final victory, the exclusion from the party of oppositionists who fought against the Leninist general line. In party intrigues and discussions, Stalin turned out to be more inventive and unprincipled than his opponents. At the end of the 1920s, Stalin concentrated considerable power in his hands and the hands of his supporters. Opposition personalities and groups began to be removed from business. Their party status was lowered. Then arrest, exile could follow. The year 1930 can be designated as the year of completion of the Stalinization of the Politburo. Mass arrests, executions, and deportations against the general population of the country in 1930 was supplemented by discrediting campaigns and personal purges in the highest echelons of power. However, despite the use of repressive methods, Stalin did not directly accuse the opposition of participating in terrorist organizations. A few years later, what historians now call the Great Terror began. More than 500,000 oppositionists, former oppositionists, people who were accused of enemies of the people for the slightest disagreement with the party were killed. Stalin prudently destroyed the germs of doubt in all sectors of society, forcing dissenters to tremble with fear of a new dictator.